gives a fuck about an Oxford comma? By Great 78.
Who gives a fuck about an Oxford comma? I've seen those English dramas too. They're cruel. So if there's any other way to spell the word, it's fine with me. With me.
Chapter 24. The week after the kiss in the kitchenette. Early November 1999. Oxford, England. Draco. Upon his return on Monday from Diagon Alley with the chosen engagement ring, Draco ransacked the already dishevelled flat in an effort to locate Granger's pin. He searched her room thoroughly, careful to leave everything exactly as it was. He could not help the chuffed smirk on his face when he found his own Muggle photograph buried in the drawer with her knickers. Granger had never mentioned it after that night at Hogwarts, but he'd always hoped that she kept it. In the kitchen, washroom, and sitting room, he was not nearly as careful. As the sitting room was already pillaged, it took a great deal of time to search. Likewise, the size of the washroom made it extraordinarily difficult to maneuver. The state of the place when he came up empty was far worse for his searching. The kitchenette suffered equal damage, as by now he was desperate enough to paw through containers like a rabid raccoon, spilling sugar and tipping syrup onto the counters and floors with abandon. But there was no pin. He gave a long sigh, knowing it was likely on her person and therefore entirely impossible to get. Draco was unsurprised when he was unsuccessful in locating it, but he had to exhaust every option. He would need to come up with a better plan to find it. It was obvious that Granger wished to avoid him. He could not blame her. He had royally fucked up by snogging her, and yet his mind could not stop thinking about it. The taste of her lips on his, the softness of her breath, as it ghosted against his neck. He dreamt of her every night, his nightmares for once suppressed by his overwhelming desire for this witch. He continued sleeping outside of her bedroom door, earning her annoyance when she opened it on Tuesday morning. By Wednesday he could tell that she was using apparition not just to enter and exit the flat, but to move from the bedroom to the toilet, avoiding the sitting room and the kitchenette entirely. It made his heart ache, only being able to see her in classes or across the great hall at meal times. But he understood. She had every right to hate him for kissing her. He had been the one to make the first move, and later, when she tried to blame it on the alcohol, he'd allowed her to go on believing that lie, instead of telling her the truth. Every chance he got, when he was reasonably sure she wasn't in the flat, he would try to summon the pin from her room. But apparently, like the good, rule-abiding swot that she was, she took it everywhere, and he was unsuccessful. During the Thursday morning classes, he was desperate enough to try to summon it from one of their shared Muggle classes, seeing as he could not do it during the magical ones, because of the dampening effect on magic in those buildings. Perhaps no one would notice a tiny gold pin flying across the room, he mused. But he had no luck. Granger was too smart for her own good. She apparently had placed all sorts of protective enchantments on a piece of heinous jewellery, preventing summons, hexes, and spells of all sorts. Her dedication to following the rules outsmarted him at every turn, which was nothing new, he chuckled to himself, in spite of the situation. Thursday evening, November 4th, 1999. The Great Hall, Christchurch College, Oxford, England. "Theo," he asked Thursday night at the late dinner service. They'd arrived near the end of the seating and were alone in a remote corner as a result. "Where do you keep your pin that the university gave you?" Turning his attention back to Draco from where he had been flirting with someone from across the room, Theo shot him a baffled look. "What are you faffing on about?" "Pay attention, wanker. The pin that the squib advisor woman gave you. The one that allows you access to our magical classes. Where do you keep it?" Theo offered a disdainful roll of his eyes. "Draco, no woman has given me any jewellery lately, unless you count the cock ring that Melissa left on my bedside table last weekend." "Gods, Theo, I didn't need that image in my— Ugh. No, you complete pillock," Draco said in mild disgust, thankful that they were mostly alone in the dining hall right now. "I'm talking about Advisor Perkins, the magical advisor for Oxford. She gave us pins at the start of term, to supposedly allow us entry into the magical buildings." "Mate, I don't know what to tell you, but no one gave me a special pin to do anything. Now, the cock ring—" "Shut it! But the bloody cock ring! You say no one gave you a pin? Looks like this one." Draco leaned forward in his seat, unzipping his robes to tap the pin, the size of his pinky fingernail, on his lapel. The other wizard squinted at it. "No. How have I never noticed you wearing that thing before?" Draco tilted his head. "I don't know. I've worn it every day. I always move it to whatever clothes I'm wearing that day. You've truly never noticed it?" Theo shook his head, equally confused. "And you weren't given one?" "No. You say some woman gave it to you?" "Right. That's odd." Draco cast a muffliato, and then proceeded to tell Theo about how the appointment with Perkins had been set up by Shacklebolt, and how he'd been told that every magical person had to wear one. Theo was a step ahead of him. "You think this is how he's tracking the both of you?" "It's the only thing I can think of. The only thing new or different that either of us have, as far as I know. Until talking to you, I assumed we all had one. Everyone in our magical classes. I just assumed that Shacklebolt intercepted ours before Perkins gave them to us, in order to enchant them." Theo only shook his head in the negative. "I think it's just the two of you. After Hermione made such a fuss about us not reading the rules book, I skimmed it that night before bed. No mention of any special jewellery. The only thing we need to access those buildings is our wands." Draco swore softly. "Well, I suppose that confirms what the pins are for. I need to get Granger's pin from her." "So he can't track her any more?" Theo nodded. "Right. But also, he's been very careful not to show up so long as Granger is around me. When the time comes— well, suffice to say there will be a time that I need him to come. And when that happens, I'll need to make the pin go somewhere else. Make him think she's somewhere else." Draco mused, almost to himself. Theo raised one eyebrow at him. "Are you finally going to tell me what your plan is?" Draco grimaced regretfully. "Theo, mate, it's already so convoluted. It isn't just Potter and the Weasel. Apparently he ran it by his supervisor, Davies, who shut the whole idea down immediately. I'm afraid the more people who know about it, the less chance it's going to have of working." The other wizard huffed in annoyance, but said nothing. "I do need your help, though. It's about these pins. I'm trying to find hers, and I'm hoping you can help. She's avoiding me." "I assumed she was." Theo smirked. "You snog her like that on Sunday, then offer excuses and pretend like it didn't mean anything. I'm surprised she hasn't hexed your bollocks off." Draco narrowed his eyes. "Right. So, about the pin." The week after the kiss in the kitchenette. Early November 1999. Oxford, England. Hermione. The filth of their flat was really getting to her. It had gotten so much worse since the past weekend, in the aftermath of the Saturday Halloween soiree, and their snog on Sunday night. Before, the pockets of disgust were mostly contained to the sofa, the coffee table, and the floor underneath and around them. Now there were banana peels hanging off of lampshades. Muggle soda bottles were tipped over in the washroom, their contents expelled upon the floor, soaking the bath mat. The hob was covered in burnt, crispy gunk. Crisp dust settled in a fine powder on the plank flooring, and the foul smell of mildew clung to the air. The sofa had gotten into such a right state that Draco could no longer sleep on it, choosing instead to sleep on the floor outside of her bedroom, much to her chagrin. But the blasted socks! That was the absolute worst. Hermione felt as though they were multiplying, shades of her father's favourite old television show, Star Trek, when the tribbles populated out of control. It seemed as though every time she passed through the sitting room, a dozen more socks had appeared. The 2 howlers that she'd sent to Professor Slughorn that week did nothing to remedy the situation, but they made her feel better, nonetheless. On Tuesday evening after class, she stayed at the library until it closed, the last patron out of the doors as they locked up for the night. She traced back the path that she and the 2 Slytherins had taken their first night in town, locating the kebab shop for a late dinner. Seated alone at the window counter next to a family of tourists, she was lost in thought about everything going on. She barely registered the small knot of chavs trying to outdo each other in annoying behaviour in order to get her attention. She crept into the flat around 11 that night. Draco wasn't sleeping on the sofa, or in front of her bedroom door, but the light was on in the tiny washroom. Hermione wondered briefly if he was alone in there. Sudden and unexpected memories of his heated kisses flooded her mind. The sensual one a few nights ago, the urgent, fierce one last week after his nightmare, and all the ones from her dreams over the last several months. They had her body overheated and her core pulsing in a matter of seconds. Hermione abruptly dismissed these thoughts and summoned a few pairs of his underwear, so that he would not need to come into her bedroom whilst she was there. She was certain he had enough socks out here in the sitting room that he could scourgify and wear again. Slamming her bedroom door behind herself, she flopped upon the bed in annoyance at the whole situation. It took an hour of tossing and turning to finally fall asleep. On Wednesday morning, she decided to take drastic measures and avoid the sitting room entirely, certain that bending the rules a bit here at Oxford was better than confronting the filth and the wizard who'd made it, particularly if he was sleeping outside of her bedroom door again. Leaving the flat to attend class, she apparated into the electrical closet of the Muggle Meadows building. At the end of the evening, she returned directly to her room from a lavatory stall at her gym. Draco seemed in high dudgeon, constantly on edge since their kiss Sunday night. Every time they'd accidentally made eye contact across the classroom or the great hall, his glower practically pulsated off of him. Hermione was certain that he hated himself for snogging her, and probably hated her for going along with it, and not pushing him away sooner. She was not sure if it was her blood status that repelled Draco, or the fact that he was dating someone else and should not have kissed her in the first place. Whatever it was, he was working to avoid her as much as she was trying to avoid him. Jason had been polite, but a bit off all week, and she'd been too distracted to care very much. Between her course workload, avoiding Draco and his pigsty, her exasperating partnership project with Amelia, and the way her mind sometimes allowed itself to wander into daydreams about that kiss in the kitchenette, she had not given much thought to Jason, other than to wonder if he'd been entirely forthcoming with her. The possibility of him being Miranda Perkins' son still nagged at her brain. Why would he have not said this when they first met? True, she had been a bit insulting towards the woman that day, Hermione supposed. She could have just asked him now, but that would make it more obvious that she had followed him to his house, which was rather a bad look for her. Did it mean that he was possibly a wizard? This did not fit. There was nothing magical about the man that she could sense when they touched. Generally speaking, another magical person created what felt almost like a vibration beneath her fingertips, almost as though she'd strummed a guitar. Not so with Jason. On Wednesday, they had eaten together in the great hall, and Jason monopolized their conversation with discussions about their tort law class, as well as their partner assignments in constitutional law. Jason had partnered with another classmate named David, an older gentleman who'd spent 25 years as a paralegal for a barrister. As his doddering old boss had been well past his prime, David had taken on the majority of the work in their firm, and was now doing the same in their partnership project, which seemed to suit Jason just fine. As he pulled her into her arms for a parting embrace, Hermione's magic sought out a kindred spirit within him, but found nothing. Friday, November 5th, 1999. On Friday, she ran into Jason at the gym, fitting in a lifting session between classes, and she decided to join him. When they were done and both had showered in their respective dressing rooms, she suggested lunch at the Great Hall before their afternoon classes. Sounds good. I left home so early this morning that I didn't have time for breakfast." It was his first mention of his private life since their afternoon walk in the park on Sunday. It was a slim opening, but Hermione took it. "It must be nice, living at home whilst going to school. Are your parents still married?" Jason's face darkened, and he looked uncomfortable. "No. Mum's family didn't like my father, and my mum cared too much about what they thought, so Dad left." "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize," she said, pulling off her coat as they walked. A brief warm spell had arrived, despite the late autumn day, and between the workout and the shower she was quite warm. "No, how could you?" Jason asked with a small smile, holding out his arm to take her coat. She gave it to him with her own smile. "In any case, all of this stuff with my father, it's in the past. I haven't heard from him since I was 12. "I'm sorry to hear it," Hermione said, well aware of how fragile family ties could be. "So, you're close with your mother's family, then?" Jason gave a brief sigh before shaking his head. "Not really. They look down on us a lot, if I'm being honest." Her eyes widened. "Why? Your mother is on her own, and she's raised a wonderful son. And you're going to law school at Oxford. What could they possibly have to look down upon?" His small laugh sounded hollow as they continued walking. "That's kind of you, but I suppose they have their reasons." She knew quite well that, indeed, there were plenty of reasons for family members to not be close. She was making him uncomfortable, she could tell, so she decided to drop the subject. Suddenly he stopped and pulled her into his arms. "Enough about mums and families, yeah?" And with that, he lowered his lips to hers in a surprisingly powerful kiss. Her breath was momentarily taken away as his tongue darted between her lips, languidly curling around hers as his hands came to her waist. Surprised, she did not protest, even though a part of her realized at once that she was not as swept away by the gesture as she should have been. It was their first real kiss, but after the one she'd shared with Draco Sunday night in her flat, this one felt wooden and stilted. His teeth knocked against hers when she failed to turn her head in time, and he pulled back. I'm sorry, Hermione. I didn't mean to be so, presumptuous," Jason said hurriedly, a quick flush rushing to his cheeks. "I'll be honest, I don't have a lot of dating experience with girls like you." She tilted her head at him, still surprised at his actions. She was a little flushed herself, and not just from the warm autumn day. "Girls like me?" "Pretty girls. Proper girls," he supplied hesitantly. "I've only dated a couple of girls, years back, in my early years of secondary, you see." "Ah, well, you're a great kisser," in any case. With the smile that broke across Jason's face, Hermione would not dream of telling him that it was only the second best kiss she'd shared this week. They held hands as they walked to the great hall, and Hermione allowed herself to relax. Here was a man interested in her, in spending time with her. He didn't kiss her, then ignore her for days on end. He didn't infuriate her with his messy habits and his smirks and his droll sense of humour. He wasn't going to be forever for her, but perhaps he could be right now, she thought, as they sat with their plates of food to eat. A little while later, Hermione was smiling over at him, trying to pay attention to Jason's convoluted musings about John Locke, when her elbow was jostled roughly. Mildly annoyed, she looked up to find Theo dropping onto the bench next to her. "Hermione, love! I've been looking all over for you. Haven't seen you in the flat in a doxy's ear. Where have you been disappearing to all this time?" he asked playfully as he sat, nicking a handful of chips saturated in malt vinegar from her plate. Jason looked confused at the other man's words and sudden appearance. She looked uncomfortably between the two men with an uncertain smile. You mean a donkey's year, Theo? He's always mixing up common phrases," she explained to Jason. To Theo she replied, "I suppose we just keep missing each other, Theo. Is everything all right?" She had not seen the wizard since he had interrupted the kiss she shared with Draco several days ago, and his knowing smirk flustered her, causing her body heat to rise again. "Aces, love, just wanted to see if I could blend your ear a moment about something. Alone," he said, smiling reassuringly over at Jason, who smiled back. "All right if I walk you to Civil?" Sure," she answered hurriedly, as Jason gathered his things. "I need to return a book to the library. See you in class," Jason said, leaning over to drop a quick kiss on Hermione's cheek. "He seems rather dishy," Theo said in a low voice once they were alone. "Theo, you really shouldn't use Muggle phrases unless you're sure you know them. It sounds suspicious when you mix them up that way." "Noted, sweet. Are you going to eat that last piece?" Theo leaned over her plate, eyeing the bit of fried cod on her plate. "Go ahead," she said, watching Jason walk away. "What did you need to talk about?" "I was just wondering, did you get a pin from your advisor when we started here? A little gold thing?" Theo asked as he pulled her plate towards himself, dousing the fish further in an unholy amount of malt vinegar. Hermione frowned slightly. "Yes, I got one. Supposedly something to do with accessing the magical buildings, but I think it also has some sort of protective charms on it, from what our advisor said. You met with Miss Perkins as well, I assume?" She glanced back up at where she'd last seen Jason, heading for the main doors. To her surprise, he had stopped and was watching the two of them. Spotting her curious look, he waved with a smile at her and hurried to the door. Right," Theo said around a mouthful of cod, his eyes following hers and giving the man a fishy grin. "I just have the damnedest time keeping up with mine. Sometimes I forget it in my room and I have to rely on Draco to get me inside the building, you know." Hermione nodded uncertainly. Apparently she did not know everything about how these pins worked, as she thought they needed to be on the person's body, not just nearby. "My point is," Theo went on, dabbing fish grease from the corners of his mouth, "I need a better suggestion of where to place mine so that I don't forget it. Where do you keep yours?" That day in the ladies' toilet as her charms washed down the sink came back to her, but she pushed those memories aside roughly. It was on a bracelet, but I broke that. So now it's on my scarf, just here. I disillusion it so it isn't visible, really. Since I wear this every day, I don't even have to think about whether I have it or not." "Ah, of course. That's why I've never seen you wearing the pin, I suppose," Theo said with a smile. "That's the perfect place." Not certain she wanted to know the answer, Hermione asked, "Where have you been keeping yours?" Theo gave a conspiratorial smile. "Well, like you, I did try attaching it to jewellery at first. That lovely redhead I sit next to in civil law, you know, Melissa, she gave me a beautiful ring a bit back, but after a while the ring got, too tight, and I had to forego wearing it for a time, so now I simply wear my pin on my pants." Hermione chuckled. "Well, as often as you take those off, I can definitely see how you keep losing it." Theo gave her a knowing smirk, before picking up Hermione's glass of wine and draining it. They both stood, heading for the double doors. "I need to visit the flat, get my pin and all," Theo announced as they left. "But, Theo, it's Friday. There's no magical classes on Fridays. You don't need the pin today." He nodded. "You're right, only I feel like I should carry it. You know what I mean?" I suppose you're right," she said, shifting her coat and scarf to her other arm, so that she could ruck up her bag better on her shoulder. "My goodness, where are my manners? Allow me to take this coat, love," Theo said, grabbing the heavy woolen coat from her arms. "Oh, thank you. When I left the flat this morning it was much cooler. I didn't expect the weather to get this warm, but it's a pleasant surprise," she said, tilting her face up to enjoy the bit of weak November sunshine that sliced determinedly between two clouds. "It is lovely," Theo agreed. He opened the front doors of Peckwater and stood back to allow her to enter first. Once inside, they found the building coordinator sorting letters into the post. "Oh, hello, you two," the hurried young woman said. "I had a bunch of mispitched post put into my box by accident. I think the letter carrier must have been in a hurry to get out and enjoy the sunshine today. You're Hermione in 307, right? This is yours." "Thank you," she said, accepting the letter. "Hermione, I'm just going to pop into the flat for a mo. See you in civil law?" Theo tossed over his shoulder, already halfway up the staircase. "Yes, fine," Hermione said stiffly, without noticing him, because now she had turned over the thick envelope and spotted the return address. Granger Residence, 8 Heathsgate, Hampstead Garden, London, Northwest 11, Great Britain. Something in her subconscious had recognized the envelope immediately, even before she'd seen the address in the familiar handwriting. Linda Granger had been using the same shell-pink stationery set from Ryman's for the last 30-some-odd years. It was as much a part of Hermione's childhood as the Wedgwood blue spode teapot that belonged to her great-grandmother, or the ornate nativity creche that her family set out around this time of year every holiday season, the one that her parents found in a French thrift shop their first year of marriage. Hermione hardly paid attention to the heavy rucksack falling from her shoulder and thudding to the ground. Backing towards the double front doors, she pushed at the door she'd entered with her backside, blinking hard at the sudden sunshine that greeted her outside. She did not even notice as the building manager rolled her eyes at the rucksack left in the middle of the foyer. "Freshers! They think they own the place," she muttered to herself in annoyance, shoving the rucksack out of the footpath. Hermione walked along the pavement, her eyes not seeing anything in front of her, preemptive tears filling them without even knowing the letter's contents. She bit her lip, turning into the first building outside of the campus, the tiny Tesco from which Draco seemed to purchase snacks, liquor, and beer daily. Through the automatic doors she walked, her eyes still glued to the envelope. "Toilet?" Hermione asked without looking up. "In the back, to your left," the older man behind the counter said, without looking up from his newspaper. She followed his instructions, nearly bumping into several displays on the way. Finally, she staggered into the first door she reached, which turned out to be a janitorial closet. She barely waited until the door closed behind her to turn on the spot and disappear, in a twist of disapparition. She landed on soft peat moss, under familiar birch branches. This copse of trees, in the small park near her childhood home in Hampstead, had been a favourite stomping grounds of hers as a child. The spring that she was fascinated with entomology, she studied and journaled about the insects that crawled along the tree trunks and grounds. When she grew fascinated with paleontology, she would lie back on the mossy ground, staring up at the tall trees, imagining their leaves being chomped by a brachiosaurus. In her early summers home from Hogwarts, she would come here and read beneath the wind-swept boughs, when the quiet solitude of the house got to her, during the week whilst her parents were at work. Even then, she supposed, something about their Hampstead home had not felt entirely like home to her. Now she settled beneath a favourite tree, sitting cross-legged. It was unseasonably warm here in London, too, but the warmth did not penetrate the tiny island of trees in the middle of the park. She barely noticed the slight chill as her fingers fumbled to open the envelope. Unlike the previous letters from her parents in the last year, this one was quite long. She scanned the first few sentences, her heart lifting for just a moment, before plummeting as she read further down the first page, and on to the second, and then the third. The bone-deep ache within her heart worsened, and when she reached the end of the letter, her eyes lifted to the top to read it once more. Tears fell unnoticed by her onto the delicate pink pages. After she had read it through a third time, she lifted her wand to incendiar the letter, then thought better of it. This could be the last message she received from them, the last reminder she had that at one point in her life 2 people had loved her unequivocally and without reservation, even if they possibly didn't any more. She'd come here on instinct, hoping against hope that the length of the letter indicated a possible reconciliation between them. Instead, it felt very much more like a disinheritance. Tears flooding her eyes, she stood, brushing bits of moss and dirt from her bottom. She turned quickly, her destination haphazardly set in her mind, something that Wilkie Twycross would have failed her for. On their apparition test years ago, she was certain. She spun, in search of comfort, relying on her instincts to get herself home. Vaguely, she planned to return directly to her bedroom in the little Peckwater flat. In actuality, she found herself standing in the exact spot that she had last found in a happy solace, the last place that she could truly say her heart felt light and free, even if it was just for a moment. She stood in the kitchenette of the flat, her back against the counter. A bit less than 5 days before, Draco Malfoy approached her in this very spot, took her in his arms, and kissed her like he meant it. Only he hadn't. He hadn't meant it at all. Her tears redoubled at this realization that what she thought of as her last true moment of happiness had been a complete fraud, a drunken mistake. Damn him! Draco bloody Malfoy, and his stupid, meaningless snog, and his miserable mess, was going to be what finally broke her, Hermione thought. This filthy fucking flat had only gotten worse since the last time she'd been in this room on Tuesday night, since she'd been using apparition to enter and leave her room. It was all so much worse. Everything was worse because of that kiss. No, scratch that. The kiss itself had been like a tiny glimpse into heaven. In that moment, her worries about Jason and classes and her grades and her parents had all disappeared, however briefly. His kiss carried a sense of promise, of hope, that there was someone on her side, willing to shoulder a bit of the troubles she faced, however fleeting or false the feeling was. Yes, she had come to the conclusion that nothing could happen between them for so many reasons, but it would have taken just a simple word, a look from Draco to change her mind the following morning. Instead, he only confirmed her fears, and all of those buried hopes were dashed. Now, in the aftermath of another loss, she focused her anger on him. How dare Draco take away that feeling from her? How dare he play with her emotions when she had only been trying to do the right thing, trying to be a good and loyal friend to him? Had she taken a moment to think on it, her rational mind would have fully recognized that she was projecting her feelings towards her parents onto Draco. But in the moment, standing in the filthiest kitchenette she'd ever seen, she did not give a bloody fuck about such psychological mumble-jumble. From where she stood, it looked as though the flat had been absolutely ransacked. Cupboards stood open, food spilt out of containers, dishes with food crusted upon them piled high in the sink, balanced precariously, like a children's game of spillikans. But the sitting room had been in a right state for far longer, and it drew her ire the most. What began as a mumble to herself about the conditions of the space soon mushroomed into a full-blown diatribe about the detritus that surrounded her. Can he not simply put the dirty dishes into the sink? Has he never learned a single washing spell? She looked over at Crookshanks, stretched out in his designated club chair. The cat's tail beat like a drum upon an empty crisp bag that once held some of Malfoy's favourite prawn-flavoured crisps. Snatching up the bag and finding another one exactly like it underneath, she shook her head in exasperation. And the crisp bags, the biscuit sleeves, the cans of beer! Do you not know what a rubbish bin is? It's right there. You can even enlarge it if it's not enough space. Or, my God, you're a wizard! Just vanish them when you're finished. She stepped back to survey the mess, and found her heel now sinking into a bowl of porridge that inexplicably had been left on the ground. Kicking at the dish fiercely, she watched it skitter into a pile of crumpled, dirty socks. What the absolute fuck, Malfoy? You cannot leave dirty dishes lying around. You've got to make sure that every bit of food is scourgified from the dish before you put it in the sink, Malfoy. Otherwise, the flat will be crawling with bugs. There was, of course, no answer. Crookshanks blinked at her interestedly, his curiosity piqued either about the mention of food or about the condition of his witch's mental state. Why are you living this way? Why can't you call one of your blasted elves if you can't solve this yourself? She cried. An image popped into her mind of Draco's tiny elf appearing at her side nearly a year and a half before, dressed in an adorable suit that signalled his freedom. Her tears grew more intense, blurring the room in front of her. How was Draco Malfoy such a dichotomy? This man dated muggles. He helped a drunken muggle-born witch to bed so tenderly last New Year's Eve. He freed a house elf to save the defenceless creature from Voldemort. And yet he could play with her emotions so flippantly. He could leave the flat in this state, knowing it would annoy her and simply not care. She wiped furiously at her tears, her eyes now focusing on the piles of socks everywhere. There had seemed so many before, but now the number seemed unreal, uncountable. They looked as though they had doubled in quantity since Sunday. She noticed several grey socks embroidered with little green snakes, and for some reason the sight of these fanciful socks made her nearly apoplectic in anger. The whimsy, the decadence, the Slytherinn-ness of them. The man had the audacity to wreak complete havoc in this hellacious hovel, but then would go out into the world and present himself as some kind of gregarious, posh dandy, without a care to be had. All the while her animated tirade continued, at times becoming almost incoherent, and at other times cutting with baleful precision through the charged air of the flat. "And if I have to see one more pair of your damned dirty socks balled up on the floor of this disgusting flat, I will hex you into the furthest echelons of hell, Draco Malfoy!" Hermione looked around rapidly, but only her cat stared back at her. Damn it! Draco needed to hear all of this from her, even if they couldn't stand to be around each other right now. He needed to understand how all of this made her feel. She should have used her quick quotes quill. Of course, she could simply leave him a note, tell him exactly how he needed to get himself together. Rushing to her room to retrieve the beautiful quill, she hurried back out into the mess. But the moment had passed. Hermione dropped to the sofa, spent. The futility of it all was settling upon her, and her exhaustion was catching up to her. Her sleep last night had been paltry, dominated by her dreams, just as it had been for weeks now. She slumped sideways on the sofa, her cheek brushing the pile of jumpers and scarves that had taken over the space, necessitating Draco to sleep on the floor of all places. His richly scented cologne surrounded her, and she sucked in the fragrance greedily before burrowing her face into a particularly soft jumper. Sleep crept in, overtaking her without protest. Her quill fell from her slumber-lax fingers onto the floor below, rolling underneath the sofa to rest next to a half-eaten sleeve of digestive biscuits. There was a buzz beneath her head. She leapt up, furiously eyeing the pile of clothes that she'd so recently rested upon. She dropped her wand from her sleeve, and, in a moment of desperation, pried loose a dirty fork that appeared to be glued to a plate on the coffee table. The door to the flat opened, and Draco and Theo stepped in, looking windswept and perfectly dressed, as though they had just arrived via yacht to enjoy a polo match with the Crown Prince. In stark contrast with the dishevelled flat, they looked as out of place as a vicar at a stag do. Theo spotted her first, offering a quick, almost apologetic smile at their arrival. Draco had been speaking animatedly to him, but Theo cut his eyes sideways at the other man to silence him. But it was the sight of Draco that nearly caused her brain to short-circuit there and then. He cut a dashing figure, as always, every hair in place, hardly a wrinkle or crease to be found on his person or his ensemble. His silver eyes seemed to spark in excitement, set off by the— Was that her scarf? Hermione's hands flew to her neck, unmoored by the sudden realization of the scarf's absence. She needed that. Without it, she wouldn't be able to access her magical classes on Monday morning. For his part, Draco seemed obnoxiously oblivious to her distress as he loosened first the scarf, then his tie, all the while smirking at her. Now that she looked at him closer, she could see the slight gauntness of his cheeks and under-eyes, the bit of stubble that dusted his cheeks. He, too, looked as though he had not gotten the best rest as of late, but where she wore her fatigue like a drab shawl of sallow skin and limp, frizzy curls, Draco's tiredness only made him look melancholic or introspective, a beautifully handsome Elizabethan poet out of place in time. Her eyes returned to the berry-coloured scarf. Why the fuck are you wearing my scarf, Malfoy? Accio scarf! Draco caught it just as it slid from his neck. No, Granger. I need this later tonight. I'm going out for drinks later. Sod off, and wear one of your own bloody scarves, Malfoy. I'm sure there are plenty of acceptable ones in this living pile of absolute rubbish here on the sofa. This reminded her of whatever it was that had awoken her from her rest on the sofa. She turned back quickly, pointing the fork in her hand at the pile of clothing. Draco peeled back a handful of items, locating the golden stitch buried beneath the layers. It buzzed angrily as it flew around her head, and the blonde wizard caught it between his first 2 fingers and thumb, holding it delicately as it fluttered. No, Granger, I told the bird over the telephone that I'd be wearing a raspberry-coloured scarf, given to me by my sister on her deathbed. She sounded very sympathetic. I'm predicting a bit of under-the-shirt action in commiseration for my loss. Her eyes widened in renewed anger. Was this another woman, then? Not satisfied to fuck Amelia and snog Hermione, he was now meeting another woman. The rage in her chest mixed with her magic and radiated off her body. Theo took a step backwards from the pair of them, but kept his eyes glued to the spectacle interestedly. Gods! You are the absolute most foul... Ugh! What are you even talking about, Malfoy? I wasn't aware that you knew how to use a telephone. And it's not pronounced teletone, by the way. Also, what woman do you mean? Draco frowned as he resettled the scarf round his neck. I don't know, Allison? Abigail? Maybe it was Amanda. She dialed here a few days ago looking for you about some assignment. I told her you weren't here, and we got to talking, and before I knew it, she was asking me to meet her for drinks. Hermione exhaled deeply through her nose, feeling like a bull facing off against a matador. He was apparently toying with her, enjoying this game far too much. Might it have been Amelia? Might have, he shrugged. In the end, she gave up on retrieving her scarf from Draco that night. What did it matter to her, she supposed, if he wore it to meet Amelia? She would not need it again until Monday, when it was time to return to the magical classes, and she took a harsh bit of satisfaction in knowing that, as Hermione wore the scarf nearly every day, Amelia would likely recognize it as hers. Besides, 2 could play at this game, she decided, going to her bedside table and digging through the neatly organized items to find her vibrator. The little green bullet-shaped toy jolted to life in her palm, and she lay back on the bed to allow it to work its own particular type of magic. Pushing away thoughts of the last several minutes roughly, she instead focused on Jason. Jason, who had never bullied her, never teased her with an amazing snog, only to take it back regretfully hours later. Jason, who had never featured in her dreams, doing any of the sweet and dirty things to her that she had imagined Draco doing. She tried hard to fix the dark-haired man in her mind. It was Jason lying atop her, his fingers reaching between them, rubbing a soft vibration against her clit. But as her climax eluded her, remaining just out of reach, the vision changed. Instead of clutching soft waves of brown, her fingers were running through silky blonde. Instead of Jason's slightly stocky, shorter build, she was picturing long, alabaster fingers and limbs, a chest slightly muscled and familiar in how it was neither too much nor too little. Granger, he groaned in agonized pleasure in her mind, his silver eyes trained on her copper ones. Her orgasm nearly ripped her open as it peaked, then crashed, radiating from her center to every extremity of her body. As she came down from this high, her mind was frozen in horror at how her thoughts had gotten away from her. "No! Don't even entertain the idea," she admonished herself. "Draco doesn't love you, and he never will." Her hand dropped from her center, limbs weak from the forbidden euphoria she'd just experienced. Pulling up her blankets over her shivering body, she rolled to her side, forcing every thought out of her mind, and sinking into a fitful sleep. Thank you for listening to Who Gives a Fuck About an Oxford Comma by Great 78. If you enjoyed this story and would like to listen to more, please follow me on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts by searching for Silver and Copper. Or you can find me under Great 78 on Archive of Our Own.